So part of the conference over the last couple of years is we've done some debates, and they've been pretty lively debates between fuel cell and battery electric, and we've had a lot of fun with that. This year, as we try to look to expand the conference, one thing we've been vehemently resisting as an organization is to bring other vehicles into this conference because it's always been a bus conference. And yes, we could expand attendance, but I think the fact that it's focused on buses makes it unique. I think it makes it more valuable for folks that build and operate buses. But we are looking at other markets for buses because buses aren't just in transit. So to the extent we can, we're going to today talk about how buses are operating in other applications, zero-emission buses, airport and school bus applications. So we have 3 speakers today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Gilbert does look a little different than the last time I talked to him on the end. Our school bus operator, Gilbert Rosas, unexpectedly had an issue come up yesterday, and we just found out he wasn't going to be here. This is Erik Bigelow, who works for CTE, who's going to do his best to fill in at the last minute. So he hasn't had the opportunity necessarily to prepare like everybody else has, but he never prepares, so he should be fine. So with that, my first question is, I want to know what's your big motivator for operating zero-emission buses. So if you don't mind just introducing yourself, tell us how you got here one at a time, and then answer the question on what's your biggest motivation to operate zero-emission buses?
Good morning. Can you hear me? Oh, let me see.
Zoom call. Should be able to turn it.
Test.
Yep.
There we go. That's good. Good morning. My name is Sal Llamas. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at AC Transit. Welcome, and thank you for being here and joining our session. So our biggest motivator for transitioning to zero-emission buses, and one incredible thing is a side effect of operating zero-emission buses is the benefit to the environment. AC Transit has been a leader in deploying and advancing zero-emissions technology since the turn of the millennium, and that is one of our commitments to our communities. We want to make sure that we provide not only safe, reliable transit options, but we also want to make sure we care for our communities. And frankly, that's the reason why public transit exists. We exist to serve communities and do the best we can to support them. But transitioning public transit to zero emission makes total sense. We carry a lot of people. We put our buses on every roadway imaginable. The service lines that we operate are woven into the fabric of our communities. One public transit bus, 40-foot standard public transit bus, carries about 50 passengers at full capacity when they're loaded. And those passengers are not driving a vehicle. So not only does it help with air quality, but also helps with congestion and keeping the buses on time and moving the communities where they belong. So it is our commitment to make sure that we are part of that, and we do our part to support the change, because as Dan mentioned in his slide, climate change is real. And we need to take action now. We need to start taking action that is going to deliver some meaningful and sustainable results. And that's our purpose. One last thing, though. There is one more motivator that we have to factor in. In California, we actually have a mandate, so we have to do it. By 2040, we have to transition all public transit buses, and that helps us stay a little bit focused, but it's from our heart that we're doing it.
And AC Transit was doing it well before a mandate was in place, so I think that's a good indicator. Okay, Ian, if you don't mind introducing yourself and giving us a little background on why zero emission is important to you.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Ian Redhead. I know I don't have red here, and most people get a little confused. I am the Deputy Director at Kansas City International Airport, and I'm pleased to be here. At Kansas City International Airport, we have actually been running CNG buses for over 25 years. And within the last 7 years, we actually started adding electric buses to our fleet. As Sal said, one of the primary reasons is for environmental reasons. And the other reason is we're actually building a brand new facility which will be online in the first quarter of 2023. And we are requiring the airlines in their ground support equipment, a lot of that equipment, to be electric vehicles. So it would be very stupid if we didn't set the tone ahead of time so that they would not say, well, okay, you're making us do this and you are not doing that. So we wanted to make sure that we set an example. And actually just recently, the city manager of Kansas City has issued an edict that says, going forward, all departments will look at purchasing electric vehicles to add to the fleet. But the other thing, to be quite honest with you, is that the cost at the time when we started getting into electric vehicles was advantageous to us. When you look at the CNG technology and some of the maintenance required, going to electric made sense, and we knew going electric was a long-term solution. As Dan said, that's going to be here for a long time. I'm also the chair of an environmental committee for FAA, and it would be kind of tongue-tied. It would be very bad as the chair of an environmental committee if I also didn't set the example at my airport.
Great. All right, Erik, step in and see what you got.
Morning. So again, taking the place of Gil Rosas as my main point of contact on our project with Stockton Unified School District. So a little bit of what I say will be on part of Stockton Unified School District. But yeah, doing my best to be Gil. He's a great booster for electric school buses. So it's really he's sad not to be able to join today. For rationale, I mean. It really is, in this case, all about the kids, to be honest. The local pollution and local criteria emissions, there's a straight line between those and a lot of negative health impacts on kids whose developing lungs use more air per kilogram than adults do. And in Stockton in particular, over 80% of the kids are in disadvantaged communities, so it's a particularly interesting focus for Stockton. And the need to transition to zero-emission vehicles for the climate impacts to prevent the worst impact of climate change, that really is for the kids as well. You know, this really is a question for future generations. So.
Great. Erik, I'm going to stick with you on the next one. We've talked about the passengers, and you make a compelling case for the kids. Let's talk about the drivers and the passengers in other applications. How do they like the bus? And not just how do they like driving it, but how do they like operating it? And as any training issues come up, particular to school buses, that make it difficult?
Sure. So as far on the operator side, it's a quiet, smooth ride. Of course, these are all brand new buses, which always makes for a nice change from the oldest buses from the fleet, which were pulled out to replace these. So I think, really, the drivers really do appreciate them. I think there haven't been a lot of training challenges on the driver's side. Of course, everyone knows about, you have to remind people to plug the bus in. It's an important feature, makes it work a lot better. But other than that, it's been pretty smooth. And on the kids' side, to be honest, kids don't really know what's under the hood, and they don't care.
Well, it's interesting. When I mentioned earlier we did Bluebirds for a school bus. When we first started demoing that, and I haven't heard a lot of that recently, but the drivers noted that because the bus was quiet, the kids, they still talked with each other, but they didn't have to yell over the sound of a diesel bus. So for the driver's sanity, they really noticed that they were operating in a quieter environment, and I don't think there was a single conversation that wasn't happening. As you said, school kids don't know what the technology is under the hood, but if they don't have to raise their voice to talk to each other, they don't necessarily do that. All right, Sal, what about your operators and your passengers?
Likewise, our operators, they love the quiet ride, although sometimes you don't want to hear what our passengers have to say. Just imagine picking up a bus full of passengers that just left a late night concert or a sports game, or even worse, the local watering hole. Although the passengers alike and the operators love the quiet, smooth ride of a zero-emission electric drive bus. And they also, a lot of our riders, they're connected to AC Transit. They know who we are. A lot of them are transit groupies. They follow our buses, and when they know they're riding a zero-emission bus, they love it. They post it on social media, and they give us credit for that. So definitely, all around, they love the zero-emission quiet bus.
Great. Ian?
So I think there's a theme here. Everybody seems to like them. Our operators actually like our electric buses because they're a lot easier to operate as opposed to the CNG buses. You could actually have a conversation in the bus with the passengers next to you. As somebody said, it's not always, you don't really always want to hear what these passengers are saying, sometimes after Chiefs games and things like that, because some of them have had a couple of drinks, and especially when the Chiefs win again, I can envision more problems for us. But the other thing that we actually had a problem with is that the buses were so quiet, the drivers were afraid that the people operating the other vehicles up close to the curb wouldn't hear them coming. So that was, for us, was a really big concern, was to get over that fear. of operating in close confines with actually people who are driving vehicles, because they are really so quiet that you don't hear them coming. But they like them in general, and I think the passengers are really surprised that the bus is running. You know, you can get on the bus and they're kind of waiting for you when you pick them up at a stop, and they're like, okay, waiting to hear this engine rev up and stuff, and it doesn't happen. But overall, I think that our experience has been significant. We are actually looking to get additional buses. And as I said, we're hoping to open the terminal in 2023, and we hope to have half of our fleet converted from CNG over to electric buses, and then to keep going forward with electric buses and not replace any of our CNG fleet.
Yeah, it's interesting on the quiet ride. You know, we're a block away from the 16th Mall shuttle, and I think those BYD buses have noise generators because of that very fear, that they were so quiet with people crossing the street. So if you don't get a chance, please, if you haven't had the chance yet, please get the chance to walk a block and ride that shuttle. It's super popular, and it's great to see transit done right, because people are much more willing to ride something. You can see the next bus coming almost every time. We saw that in Chattanooga too. If they could see the next bus coming, they had a level of comfortability that, you know, they could ride the bus, and if it goes in a loop, they don't really have to read a schedule or jump on a bus or understand a schedule to be able to ride the bus. So make sure you take advantage of that.
So Dan, there's actually one other thing. The new design of our new terminal is going to be very different than what we have now. So we're actually putting all the airlines into one facility. So whereas it was intuitive when you got on certain buses that you were going to certain airlines, making announcements now inside the bus and having people being able to understand where the different airlines are now in a single terminal is going to be critical. So making sure that it's quiet, and you don't have to use a PA system and all of those things. You know, people talk about noise pollution. Well, when you're close to an airport, you hear a lot of noise anyway. So one of the things is when we start giving out announcements to people on those buses, it's a lot easier when these buses are quiet.
Okay, let's talk about duty cycles. You know, one of the challenges for battery electric and fuel cell electric buses, you know, we know in transit there's very, very tough duty cycles, and it's asking a lot of a vehicle to do what we ask them to do in transit. So I'm going to start with you, Sal. Tell us what's unique and what's tough about your duty cycle, and then I'd like to hear, you know, input from the other two on what their duty cycles are like.
Absolutely. Well, teleportation would be amazing, but we're not there yet. But public transit probably has the toughest duty cycles when it comes to moving people. We need a bus that is robust, that can run approximately 16 to 18 hours per day. We operate 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our buses, as a matter of fact, at AC Transit, our longest route is 288 miles, and the bus runs for 23 hours. So essentially almost nonstop. And since we use federal funds to procure our fleet, we need to operate the buses at a minimum 12 years for a standard 40-foot bus and 16 years for an over-the-road commuter bus. So we really need to have equipment that is durable, that lasts, and that can be maintained for the useful life of the equipment.
Great. Erik, you want to tell us a little bit about the school bus duty cycle?
Yeah, school buses have typically two main pullouts, a morning and an afternoon run, with some downtime back at the yard in the middle of the day. So there is a lot of flexibility in to charge when it's the cheapest. If that's the middle of the day, that's great. If that's at night, that's available as well. So right now the duty cycle and needs the vehicles is actually not the biggest challenge. It's really just need more of the vehicles. And then some of the, I guess, maybe unique challenges. So from the typical operations, that part is pretty easy to plan for. A current challenge is how to handle the activity buses when a bus might drive, 100, 150 miles one way, and then have to turn around and make it home after the sporting event or whatever the destination is. So knowing how to plan for that charging at the far end to be able to electrify those longer runs is one of the challenges.
Sure. Ian?
So we run all our buses right now currently used for passengers in our economy parking facility and to bring them back and forth to the terminals. So we're not the largest airport in the world. We actually run 24/7. At the height of when we're moving most of the passengers, which is probably about 4 o'clock in the morning when we have what is called the first push, we do about, I think it's 5 cycles an hour on a single bus. So if you put that into an 8-hour electric bus, it's about 40 cycles in an 8-hour bus. One of the things when we went to electric, we were conscious about how long we could get these buses to operate. So we did a lot of homework, and actually, I'm sitting here, if my fleet manager Kenny Williams hadn't retired, he would probably be the guy sitting here because he's definitely more qualified than me to talk about this. But we did a lot of homework in looking at what type of buses we really needed to operate inside of a parking facility. And when we decided on the bus company and the bus that we got, when we were looking at the new terminal, we said, okay, how do we extend the life of the bus during its operation? So we're actually putting in inductive charging loops in our new facility. So that will actually help when we are loading passengers. The bus will actually be stopped on top of the inductive charger, and it will extend the useful life. We say 8 hours, what we use regularly, it is actually longer than 8 hours, but a normal driver doesn't work more than an 8-hour shift, but the bus can do more. When you add the inductive charging and the regen and all of these things, we actually can get a lot more than 8 hours out of a bus. So on a typical normal day, we do, like I said, we do 80 cycles in an 8-hour period. But I can imagine that it will be extended, especially when we put in the inductive charging and so forth.
Great. I'm going to move to funding. And Ian, I'm going to go ahead and stick with you. Sal mentioned that at FTA gets the operators get funding from FTA, and in return they have to operate vehicles for 12 years or 16 years, depending on the vehicle. What funding sources are available to you at an airport, and not just funding sources to help offset the cost of the vehicles, but any grant programs or other things that you've looked at to help pay for the transition to zero emission?
Well, I will tell you that the FAA is just getting on board with funding for zero emission vehicles. We were probably one of the first airports that applied for the grant. And at the time, understanding that Kansas City is not in a non-attainment area, and unfortunately, or fortunately, it depends where you sit, a lot of these grants and so forth are based on how you're depicted and how your state is depicted and so forth. And one of the things I kept arguing with the FAA is, why are you penalizing me because I want to do the right thing and be better, so that I don't end up in a situation where I'm now in an environmentally concerned location? So we don't always qualify Kansas City as being rising to the top when you're being considered for funding. So the first few buses that we've actually purchased, we actually had to shell out our own money and go out and buy them ourselves. And the good thing about being the deputy director, I only have one person to convince, that's my boss. And when we did our homework, we made a really compelling case about why the electric buses were the way to go long term. Then, and anybody who wants to come and write grants for me, just give me your card at the end of the day, because I'm trying to find funding wherever it is, because the technology is not cheap. There's a lot of options, and I think Dan mentioned it, is, one of the things you may want to think about is potential getting off the grid by using some of your batteries or some other things to create a charging area where you charge your batteries using solar power, and then you're actually charging your buses off of the batteries that you've taken over the years. And there are a lot of you in here who make batteries, and you all know what I'm talking about. That's what I would like to get to, is there's the ability to get off the grid and use the solar power and so forth to be able to charge my buses. So the funding is a challenge when you're talking about buying these buses, but long term, when you do the cost benefit analysis, it is definitely warrants the investment. And I've had no problems convincing my boss about it. Fortunately, my CFO is a little shorter than me, so I kind of intimidate him at times, I think. So he doesn't want to argue too much with me. Actually, he's a really good guy. But yeah, so we're still trying to we're going out there looking for grants to try and offset it. I mean, ultimately, and the airport is a business. Whatever we pay for, the airlines end up paying for. And I know people say, well, that means your ticket prices go up and all that. Not really, but it does to a slight degree on their landing fees and their rates and charges. So wherever we can find grants to offset our costs, it actually helps, the airlines who are doing business at our airport, and hopefully it makes us more attractive to other airlines to come in. And we're custodians of money. That's my job. So I love free money, and if I can get a grant and I can get 4 buses, and I only have to budget for the offset is only what it would cost me to get 1 bus, I'm all for it.
And I just want to jump in on the VAIL program, which is what an FAA program to help reduce emissions at airports, non-plane emissions at airports. One of the things that we've been working on the Hill is the old VAIL program. It sponsored low emission, but it required that the vehicle operate its entire duty cycle on airport property to qualify for the funding. So the shuttle buses that came on and off property did not qualify for the funding. So in the new FAA reauthorization, that's been changed so that now the shuttle buses or any vehicle that's dedicated to supporting the airport, whether it spends all its time on the airport or not, is eligible for that funding. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot of it yet, but that's always our second step, is if we can establish it, then we can try to work to make sure it's properly appropriated. So, Erik, I'm going to go with you next. Funding avenues for school buses.
For most really school buses are outside of grants available, locally funded, which makes for a real challenge. Everybody wants kids riding clean electric school buses, but education funding is always a challenge. Nobody at the same time wants to have funding for buses or more expensive buses competing with education. So that's a real challenge. The good news is, at least in California, there's a number of grant programs that are available. So CARB, called Carl Moyer, HVIP, PG&E rebates. So the Stockton Unified School District has been able to get a number of grants to help both put infrastructure in the ground, to support charging for buses beyond what they have today, as well as get those buses, get more of them available. So. It's more money would be great.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. All right, Sal, could you talk about funding avenues in addition to the formula funds that are available to help?
Yes, absolutely. And Erik mentioned some of them. So there are state and regional and federal funding programs that are available. The transition to zero emissions is going to take a lot of money. It's going to require a lot of money. So there's some relief out there to make up the gap, or in some cases pay for the full amount. And at the federal level, we have the Low-No grant program that's available. At the California Air Resources Board has the HVIP program to be able to provide some funding to cover the gap for transitioning a conventional bus to a zero-emission bus. And then at the regional level in California, we have, especially in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District has the Carl Moyer, just like Erik mentioned, the program that offers funding to make that transition. So I think that's but it's like anything else. It's only available while supplies last. And in this case, those programs are constantly oversubscribed. So that is a big challenge.
Yeah, I think on the Low-No program alone last year, they had roughly $180 million in funding that they doled out, but they got about $1 million in bids, a little under $1 million $1 billion in bids. I should get that right, huh? $1 million. So yeah, they have been overprescribed, usually by a factor of 4 or 5. And so we're seeing in the new legislation and the new transportation bill that we're hoping will be a reality soon. Levels of funding going up dramatically, up to $5 billion for Low-No over the 5-year period. So I think that's going to be a bigger opportunity. But as we get bigger opportunities, ironically, yes, that's more money, but we've been deploying buses at 4, 5, 6 at a time. And to make the next step, we're going to have to start deploying buses at 15, 20, 25 at a time. So by definition, even if you fund the same, give the same amount of awards need to get bigger in order for us to really make a difference and make the market happen. So, Sal, I'm going to stick with you. There are choices out there. What choices do you have in transit? And I know that there's probably more choices in transit than school buses and maybe airports as well for technology and for different OEM products. So from a battery electric or a fuel cell electric perspective, how do you balance that? How do you choose between OEM or between battery electric and fuel cell?
Good question. So battery electric or fuel cell, which one's better? That's like me trying to pick my favorite child. They're both the same. They're both electric drive buses. One is a sprinter, one is a marathon runner. One combs their hair different than the other. But this is exactly why AC Transit created the Zero Emission Transit Bus Technology Analysis, to really get deep into the weeds on the data, the performance matrix, the cost, and start to really guide us as an agency where the technologies that are available are going to be able to meet and fulfill the required duty cycles that we commit to our communities.
Great. Erik, you want to talk a little bit about school buses?
Yeah, I think you might have more people riding school buses if they look like a Maserati, but school buses will look like a big yellow bus. There's a lot more, state-by-state restrictions that prescribe exactly the definition of a school bus and really not a lot of room for deviation. So any changes are really difficult to make. And all that's really centered around the really deep culture of safety that is sort of the safety is everyone's first priority. It's really first priority in everything in the school bus world. So on the technology side, the range is already okay for a lot of uses. The charging works. Really is again really the funding question at this point, I think.
Yep, great. All right, Ian.
Well, I think as you mentioned in the start of the meeting, technology has changed a lot in the 7 years that I've been involved in this business. And your batteries have gotten better, the ranges have gotten better. There are a lot of things that have gotten really a lot better in terms of just bus operations for us. The other thing that we are looking at, and this is to expand the technology into some of the other vehicles that we use on an airport. So, some of your favorite people when you get to an airport are those little, what we call TCOs, the traffic enforcement officers, that if you parked on the curb a little too long, they're going to chase you around. Well, their vehicle parks for more time than it actually is operated. So if I could just get an electric vehicle for them, it would be better to me. So we're trying to look at industry, and industry is doing a good job of changing as well, but we're trying to get some of these other vehicles to be electric vehicles, because from a maintenance standpoint and all of these other things, they actually makes more sense to us for the type of operations that they do. We're looking at other vehicles that will be operating out on the airfield as well, electric sweepers. We're looking at vehicles, well, not even vehicles, we're looking at pieces of equipment, pallet jacks, forklifts, all of these types of things that we have to operate indoors in small confined spaces. So therefore, electric is better because you don't really want a gas burning or diesel, any kind of engine inside these confined spaces with the employees that you have around and the noise that it would create. So we are really taking a very broad look at the other pieces of equipment, especially with the new facility, that are available to us. And in some cases, we're going out to manufacturers and saying, hey, help us. And there's companies now that make batteries that can convert some of the standard equipment now to battery powered equipment and things like that. So we're trying to figure out, what other avenues are out there for us and that would fit our need. So we really want to enhance the use of the technology in our new facility. And in general, I think that's the way, as Dan said, the industry is going. And people are getting on the train, and I only see it getting better and better, as you said, for the kids and for everybody else who has environmental concerns. That if everybody does the right thing for the right reasons, then we'll get to a point where we're all doing things better, smarter, and the environment will actually benefit from what we're doing.
Okay. Well, given our time, I'm going to try to finish on time. I'm going to wrap up with one question. What do you think that you each can learn from each other? And how do you think you can help each other as we all kind of move in the same direction towards zero emission? So I'll let, who wants to go first with that? There you go, Sal, jump in there.
I'll kick it off. So let's face it, we're already all doing something similar. We're in the business of transporting the Earth's most precious cargo, which is humans. We want to do it in the most safe and efficient and environmentally friendly manner as we can. So by doing that, working together, strength is going to be in numbers. Even though the shell of the bus looks different, all the subcomponents, all the drive systems, a lot of the same similar components we use, the manufacturers make them all. So we can influence the economies of scale by when we purchase our equipment together. We can also share best practices, lessons learned, so we avoid pitfalls that cost us money.
Okay. Erik?
Yeah, I think really any way and a forum and way to share best practices and gather information and be able to share learnings across groups is really powerful and valuable, for end users to know that they're not the first people to step off the ledge, and that there's a lot of other folks in the same boat, and there's a lot of interest as well to get there as quick as possible. So the faster the transition, the better.
Ian?
So I look at it as slightly different. I think the more that people are investing in the technology, the better it is for all of us. I know we're talking here about buses and so forth, but the buses is a jumping off to other things. And as long as people start realizing that there are other industries or so forth that are also looking at electric technology and so forth, then we will have more and more options to be able to supply what we want. And I think that is extremely important. You know, getting the benefit, as Sal said, about potentially buying off other people's contracts and so forth, so the cost to the people who are purchasing it is vital. The other thing is these kind of conferences, and in 2020, I think everybody suffered, but these kind of conferences where we actually, in a short period of time, are able to meet with other people who have technology that's out there, you can't get that on a Zoom or a WhatsApp or any of those kind of things. I mean, I've spent enough of my life in 2020 and 2021 sitting down on Zoom conferences and Teams and all of these things, but you don't have the opportunity to really hear who is and see who is there. I didn't recognize some people out here because of the mask, because everybody looks almost the same with this mask on, and then, you know, and I'm relatively new, so I don't know a lot of you here. But these are the types of things that is beneficial to everybody, because you get to find out who has what technology. When we started, certain companies were not doing things, now they're doing things. My assistant is really good at cutting people off who are trying to cold call me, because I get enough cold calls. I really don't have enough time for that. So these are the kind of things when my staff goes out, and I encourage them to go to these meetings and be safe, and I encourage everybody obviously to be safe, but these are the kind of meetings where you find out about the technology that's out there that is beneficial to you, and you take something back with you, and I think that's the only way you're really going to learn what's out there, because, and I'll use this as an analogy. When COVID hit, everybody had a solution for COVID at airports. And I had so many people told me, you need to do this, 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 and this. And 90% of what they told me was a complete waste of time and wouldn't work. So there's no way to vet it when everybody's just giving you cold calls. When you go to a conference like this and you talk to people like Sal and other people who are using the technology, I can get stuff reinforced for me. I can make a contact that I take back a business card and I give it to my fleet people and say, hey, call this guy up, call this lady up. They have experience using this technology. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. So to me, that's the importance of these organizations and of all of you coming to these types of things and listening to boring guys like me.
Thank you. I'll tell you one thing, Ian is going to get invited back to the conference. Thank you. I want to thank the panel for being here. You know, wrapping up, I think the one thing that occurred to me as we were talking about this is that when Erik said that the kids don't necessarily care what the propulsion on their bus is, but there are a lot of programs in conjunction with the school bus to educate the kids on why that's important that their bus is an electric bus. And the kids that are riding electric school buses today are going to be riding airport shuttles and transit buses tomorrow. And I promise you, in our work with school systems, the parents do know what bus the kids are on. And the parents do care, and they're already riding transit, and they're already riding airport shuttles. So we talked about a paradigm shift, and I think it's happening, and I think it's happening across multiple markets. And really appreciate everybody for being here. And we're going to jump to the next panel as quickly as we can. Thank you.